clearly, the Arab states are worried that Donald's withdrawal from the accord limiting the development of nuclear material has not turned out the way Donald thought it would. That would just be the end of Iran building any nuclear weapons or capacity to build them, since they haven't demonstrated they actually have even one at this point. And that's not how it's worked out.
Hi, welcome to Superpowers, the future of global security here on Times Radio. I'm James Heapy, and today I'm joined by David K. Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and the author of a number of books on Donald Trump. So who better to have join us to explain the man that is driving so much in global affairs today? David, welcome. Can I just start by asking you to give us a sort of macro assessment of what Trump is trying to achieve in his foreign policy? And I don't necessarily mean the problems he's trying to solve, but what's his sort of sense of self, the legacy he's trying to leave?
The most important thing in this regard about Donald Trump is to understand his appalling ignorance of the world. For example, I don't expect most Americans or Brits to understand the differences between being a Sunni and a Shia if you're a Muslim. But if you're president of the United States, you really need to have that bolted down solid. Trump did not even know why there was a memorial over the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor. He had to have it explained to him. He thought Finland was an oblast, a state or province of Russia. And Donald's entire life, and I've known and covered him for 37 years, is all based on his bluffing and his con artistry. So now when he looks at the world in terms of foreign policy, his view is a projection of his own life. Everybody else is stealing and cheating from us. And why would he think that way? Because his entire life, as he was taught by his father, is to steal and cheat from other people. Just don't get arrested. And so Donald looks at the world and goes, oh, trade deficit, they're stealing from us, which is nothing to do with economics, a field in which Trump has a degree, but he didn't earn it. It was given to him. And he also believes, and I've been saying this for 14 years, that he's the only person who not only should run America, but the whole world. And when I said that in 2011, I was mocked by people. That's ridiculous. Well, Trump just said it. I run the country and the whole world. So there's a megalomania. If he weren't president, and when he wasn't president, I said he had delusions of grandeur. It's kind of hard to make that argument given that he is in the White House. But his whole view is everybody else will come begging and bowing to me. I mean, he says about his tariffs, oh, they're coming to me and saying, thank you, Mr. President. We thank you so much, which is just complete fabrication. And that goes to the next point, which is Donald creates his own reality. Professor Timothy Snyder has a variation of this. He says that Trump lives in a fictional world in his head, which is why he can rewrite the narrative at any time. But it's crucial to understand that Donald says something that makes it true. And if you don't believe that, well, fake news. This morning, for example, the Washington Post and the New York Times, in their separate political polls, show continuing fall in support for Trump. And his response, well, they're rigged. I mean, they're just rigged. The failing New York Times and the Washington Compost just make up these numbers. No, they're not making up the numbers, but Donald lives in his own reality, and the rest of us, unfortunately, have to be part of this. One of the things Donald has been masterful at is getting other people to buy into his mental illness. Now, a Yale Medical School tenured psychiatry professor by the name of Bandy Lee started noticing this about Trump. I knew Bandy somewhat. And when she pressed that Donald Trump is mentally ill and he fits the model of her research, which is how people adopt the mental illness of a leader they follow in order to rationalize the world, to make sense to them, Yale fired her. And for 7 years, I was her only publisher at a news service I co-founded called DC Report, where we covered what politicians do as opposed to what they say. and despite the name, had no reporter in Washington. We covered, the paperwork and the announcements and the regulatory filings and things like that. But for 7 years, no one would publish Bandy Lee except DC Report. Now she's back in fashion with the mainstream news organizations I used to work for, like the New York Times.
Of course, Trump and his administration would argue that he has been given a clean bill of health. Is he sprinting right now because he knows that he's only got another 18 months of absolute power, and thereafter he won't be able to do everything he's doing at the moment?
Well, I caution on your otherwise very good points, only that Donald is not a strategic thinker. So in military terms, he might be able to think at the level of a sergeant. I was assigned to, take this piece of real estate and I'll come up with the tactics to do it. But he would not see the larger strategy because Donald's not a strategist. But Donald is aware when he is, in his view, being cornered or attacked, and then his very well-developed feral instincts come out. So he's like a cornered animal when things get worse. He absolutely believes he has absolute power. During the first administration, he said, I have an Article 2, referring to the presidential section of the U.S. Constitution. I have an Article 2 that says I can do anything I want. It doesn't say anything like that. It basically says the president is the errand boy of Congress who carries out its orders. Oh, and he's a commander-in-chief of the military. And so Trump certainly recognizes that there are forces arrayed against him. But he's so good at telling people his lies that I was just on another broadcast show with a tenured full professor of political science who kept saying that Trump won the majority of the vote. No, he won 49.5%, and he kept saying he had a mandate. No, he had one of the narrowest margins of victory in the history of the country, 1.5 percentage points, and had voter turnout not fallen, as it did, by more than 3 million votes. If you count population growth, you could argue 5 or 6 million. He probably would not have gotten a plurality. So Trump looks at these things and he understands them, but he really believes if you stand in his way on anything, you're illegitimate. And this goes all the way back to when he was a young man. His father had a meeting with the mayor of New York, Abe Beame, who was a longtime political ally of the Trump family. And the father wanted to take a project, what became the Grand Hyatt Hotel in New York, and move it from his name to Donald's to create the appearance this was Donald's in his 20s first big project. And when the mayor said he couldn't do that, Donald physically assaulted the mayor, and police officers had to come in the room with this is back in the days of wooden nightsticks, and put them under his armpits and lift him out of the chair. That's a pain compliance technique police used to use, and take him out of the room. Because how dare you, not do what I tell you to do? That's the mindset Donald has had since he was in his 20s, early 20s.
So you make just as an aside, you make me shudder a little in denying him a majority of the vote on the basis that there was a chunk of the population that didn't vote. That was a refrain that was often used by the Remain side of the Brexit debate here in the UK, who tried to say that the result wasn't 52-48 because they had assumed that everybody who didn't vote would have voted Remain. And I always think it's quite dangerous to try and transpose non-voters onto a expression of democratic will.
James, that is a very, very good point. We don't know. We will know in time. Political scientists are doing work on what went on in the election, as they do every 4 years. We know that young Black and Latino men moved to Trump, which is kind of surprising given his history of racism that goes back in the family 100 years, more than 100 years. But and Donald's actually been the subject of judicial proceedings where he was penalized heavily for racist conduct. But we don't know how the vote would have turned out. My point was simply that he doesn't have a mandate, very narrow margin, and he didn't win a majority. And to see a full professor who's tenured in political science get this wrong is an indication of how successfully Trump has shaped what Americans perceive to be true. Every day on American television, I see somebody say Trump won a mandate, and it's surprising.
I understand. Yeah, democracy is perfectly imperfect, I suppose. The thing that I just wanted to rehearse to you, I've just got back from the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, which is, one of these big global conferences focused on defense and security. And Emmanuel Macron opened the conference on last Friday evening. And he, 3 times in his speech, went to great pains to praise Trump and his administration on the work they're doing on Iran, and to encourage them to head towards North Korea as well. And what was really striking is, in the papers every day, we read commentary about, oh, Trump's not doing this in Gaza, Trump's not doing this in Ukraine, Trump might not be there for Taiwan. Um, and those, and we use those as the key sort of metrics of success of his foreign policy. But when you sit and listen to Macron, and actually the Australian Deputy Prime Minister, Richard Marles, had a very similar set of refrains in his speech as well, you realize that actually the most dangerous thing in global affairs right now is the breakout of nuclear weapons for Iran or for North Korea. And with that, a round of uncontrolled proliferation. And if the Trump administration is making that a focus and is engaging successfully, is he not actually guilty of doing exactly the right thing at the sort of grand strategic, the thing that matters most to the world? And therefore, should we not all be singing his praises for having the right priorities? I suspect you'll say it's accidental genius.
Well, I wouldn't say it's genius at all. First of all, that we still have a very highly developed core of strategic leaders, both in diplomacy and the military. And those are the people who are driving these things. I mean, let's remember, Donald Trump is not taking his daily presidential brief. He haphazardly now and then does it, and they're trying to figure out how to present it to him with a set from a Fox TV show like setup, because he doesn't take them because he doesn't understand any of these things. He doesn't know them. He doesn't know, for example, the basis of China's view that it should get back the island of Formosa, it should control Tibet, that China believes building artificial islands in the Spratly Islands area are all legitimate. And it's people around him who are doing these things. Now, Trump is very clear that he sees Iran as a major problem, and he said that long before he got to the White House. I would argue that the U.S. managed to take the most sophisticated country in the Middle East and drive it into partnership with its enemy of 1,000 years, the Russians, through mismanagement that went back to overthrowing Mossadegh in 1954 and subsequent events. But on a grand strategic level, Trump just doesn't have the knowledge. It's the people around him. We need to pay absolutely close attention to nuclear weapons, including non-state actors getting access to fissile materials. We need to recognize that China's expansionism is a major threat. But remember also that the government in Beijing thinks like the Catholic Church. They don't think as Americans do in terms of 90-day results, 2-year elections, 4-year elections. The view of China is, we're here forever. We will get Taiwan back under our fold sooner or later. A lot of what they're doing at the moment, running warships around, harassing fishermen, that's not warfare. That's just reminding the people in Taiwan you need to adjust because the future is going to be different than it is today. And much more concern, in my view, is dictator Kim in North Korea, who is someone in possession of absolute power and who Donald says he admires for that reason. And as Vladimir Putin's economy and military are continually degraded by these very creative war tactics and strategy of the Ukrainians. 500 years from now, war colleges are all going to be teaching what the Ukrainians did and how they did it. One has to worry about Putin and his position and whether he might do something rash, field tactical nuclear weapon, that is a small nuclear weapon, to make a point. So I don't want to minimize. We're in very dangerous times. I am troubled that around Donald you have a lot of zealots, as opposed to in his first term when he had seasoned military and diplomatic thinkers. Here he's got Marco Rubio, who's very steeped in international affairs as Secretary of State, but who bows to whatever Donald wants. And, one of the classic signs of a dictator, and Donald asserts he's has dictatorial powers, is replacing the senior military officers, because there are always junior officers who are craven and will sell out their country for vainglorious promotions. And that I think we need to worry a lot about, his constant attacks on America's generals and admirals. And I have to tell you, James, I've interviewed general officers in the United States back to when I was in my, I guess, early 20s. Oldest one I can remember, I was about 20 years old. I have met many general officers I thought were just horrible human beings, didn't want to have anything to do with them. But I have never walked away from an interview with a general officer of the United States military where I went, how did that idiot get into that position? We do a very good job of selection and promotion of military officers based on demonstrated competence and resiliency.
Do you? I was in Washington a few weeks ago, and various people explained to me that again, and I thought this was an analysis of Trump that is more complimentary than what you normally hear, but that within the administration, as you say, there are zealots, there are Russia hawks, although Mike Waltz was, ostracized as a consequence, but apparently there are some others. There are Iran hawks and there are China hawks. And then there are the sort of Tucker Carlson isolationists, almost to the point of pacifists, and that Trump sits over a White House that is slightly discordant, therefore, over foreign policy, because those three groups of hawks, the Venn diagram hardly overlaps really at all. And then the sort of Tucker Carlson isolationism is evident in some very senior parts of the administration as well. And that therefore, Trump ends up with a foreign policy where success is no war against China, no war against Ukraine, no war against Russia, no war against Iran, because then all four camps are broadly happy. And people were saying that was the lens through which to see Trump's foreign policy, and that he himself was quite happy to see the staff disagreeing, providing that he could see a path to keeping everybody on site. Discuss.
That's a really good analysis, James. That's very good. Donald very clearly recognizes that if we get into a significant land war, it's a real problem for his administration, because he promised there aren't going to be any wars. So there's a real problem there. And Donald always likes to keep the people below him fighting with one another, because it further enhances his control and their need to come and essentially bow down to Donald and beg for this or that. So I think that's a very good analysis. The only thing that isn't in your picture there is what's going on in Gaza. And Joe Biden really badly messed up in Gaza. And somewhat in the same way that he did with Ukraine. Remember in the fall of 21, Biden released national security documents to the public so people would understand that we had solid intelligence that the Russians were building up forces and would invade when the weather turned right. And instead of saying right then, don't you cross that border, we are now going to start training Ukrainian pilots with our most modern jets. We are going to provide the best HIMARS equipment. I have ordered them moved by air transport, which is, of course, horrendously expensive, today to Ukraine. He got into this little marginal changes thing. And that doesn't work when you're dealing with someone like Putin and his expansionist view that he should be running Europe, not unlike Donald's expansionist views in that regard. Canada, Denmark, Panama. And then in the case of Gaza, Biden never said to Netanyahu, knock it off, apparently. We all thought he did. He implied that, but it turns out, no, he never did. And so we have this horrendous, disproportionate response by the Netanyahu government. And Trump now is trying to avoid accountability in that zone by essentially arguing that if you criticize the administration in the Israeli government, you're anti Semitic, which is ridiculous. But how many Americans, given that half of Americans read at the level of an 11-year-old or younger, yes, half of Americans' reading level is 11 or younger, and for 22% of Americans, the reading level is 7 years old or younger. So we have a real serious problem. Remember, Trump at every rally says, "We love you, the poorly educated. We love you." And these people are so poorly educated, they don't understand that's an insult. And so Trump is trying very hard to avoid entanglement over Gaza. And that's the only thing I would add to your otherwise, I think, spot on analysis. And meanwhile, look, the Iranians are going to pursue their own interests. And we're going to continue to act as a proxy on behalf of the Saudis in particular, who are terrified of the Iranians. Saudi Arabia is a Sunni country run by an extreme form, Wahhabism, not for the leadership, but for everybody else. Whereas Iran is a country run by Shia clergy. And they have very conflicting interests. And it's very clear that the Saudis, the Bahrainians, the UAE and the Qataris are really deeply concerned about Iran and want the U.S. to be their barrier.
What is there? I've been watching Trump navigate the Middle East in a really with interest. I mean, I thought the kind of the Gaza Largo idea of a Mediterranean Riviera was a little bit insane. But I also admire that all of a sudden the Arab League and the Gulf Cooperation Council found common purpose that no other American president has generated for a generation. And so, the uncharitable version is, again, that's a fluke that Trump meant very well that he was going to turn Gaza into the Mediterranean Riviera. But it may also be that he did it deliberately to provoke and inspire exactly what's happened. The thing that is interesting is I thought that his trip to Saudi and Qatar and the UAE, the gifting of 747s aside, was actually quite a smart bit of US foreign policy in the way that in the things that he was doing. I also thought that the recognition of the Syrian new leader was a very clever way of further denying Syria to Iran. And so through that lens, I thought it was all quite clever. The bit that I can't quite figure is how the Israeli lobby in US politics has always been incredibly influential. And it feels like with Trump's necessary focus on Iran, the Israeli interest, therefore, isn't quite to the fore in the way that you would expect it to be.
Well, there certainly is a very well-oiled lobbying machine supporting Israel in the U.S. However, the U.S. support for Israel is very complex on a popular level and among Jewish leaders. I live in a neighborhood what is probably the most dense Jewish population outside of New York City and Beverly Hills in America. 38,000 people in my town, and we have 6 synagogues and a parking lot for the 7th. And so if we're out walking the dog or talking to neighbors, you get a wide variety of views, but generally highly critical of Benjamin Netanyahu. And Trump, of course, is trying to conflate things to say that criticizing Netanyahu is anti-Semitism. And Trump, in his off-the-cuff comment about the Riviera of the Mediterranean, as I saw that, it was a signal about his utter lack of regard for others, for their interests, for their property. Donald, believes eminent domain should exist and for his benefit. And he's done this throughout his career and been very annoyed when he's had to pay super premium prices for some little piece of property to put together a project, not recognizing the market nature of those transactions. I think you're absolutely correct, though, that he has managed to get the Arab states, who generally squabble among themselves a lot, to be somewhat unified. I also think they all recognize that the key to Donald is flattery and seeming support. You may be cutting him off at the ankles, but if you appear to be, "Oh, thank you, dear leader," you get a whole different set of responses. And the other Arab states clearly, the Arab states are worried that Donald's withdrawal from the accord limiting the development of nuclear material has not turned out the way Donald thought it would. That would just be the end of Iran building any nuclear weapons or capacity to build them, since they haven't demonstrated they actually have even one at this point. And that's not how it's worked out. And the Iranians have been very smart about this. They buried their locations very deeply in the ground. Bunker buster bombs, if we were to use them, are not going to be effective based on the reading I've been doing in military papers. Very complex situation there. And remember that Donald always has his hand out. I mean, one of the defining things about Donald Trump's presidency, the first term, my third book in my Trump trilogy was called The Big Cheat: How Donald Trump Enriched Himself and His Family. And now you're seeing, the investments in Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump's business against all advice by other people, the proposals for new Trump properties, the huge purchases, not just in the Middle East, but also companies in China with no employees and no revenue of his cryptocurrency. These are all ways to put money in Trump's pocket. And one thing you can reliably know about Donald Trump is if you put money in his pocket, significant amounts of money, he likes you. He loves you. He will move heaven and earth for you on the expectation you'll give him more.
Well, that segues very nicely. We've been soaring with the geostrategic eagles, but there's been some big developments on the sort of personality front in the Trump court over the last few weeks, which I can't resist asking you about. Musk gave Trump hundreds of millions of dollars, but the wheels seem to be coming off that friendship pretty rapidly. What's going to happen next?
Well, I think what happened here, to understand, is Elon Musk was given free rein to run through the government, and there may well be hidden financial relationships between Musk and Trump. Trump refuses to file his legally required Office of Government Ethics statement listing all his assets and liabilities and income. And one has to wonder, why? I mean, the ones he filed in the past had lots of fictions in them. But why is he refusing outright to do this? And remember that he owes over $600 million in 2 civil court cases he's appealing. So it could well be that Trump, somewhere in the background, has a guarantee to pay these from Elon Musk. Musk came in with this fictional government agency. There is no Doge in the law. And the first thing he did virtually was to fire the inspectors general who were looking into his violations of his government contracts. He removed lawyers and contracting officers and other people who were meddlesome in his huge military-related, communications-related, and other contracts. He then told Trump who he wanted to run NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, where his SpaceX gets many billions of dollars. And Donald instead went with a different person. And when Elon Musk realized he wasn't going to be in control of who would be his paymaster at NASA, that's when the relationship started to come apart. What we've seen since then is 2 grown men who on the inside are 13-year-old boys. I've often described Donald's life as the nightmare version of Groundhog Day, where you have to relive the same day 10,000 times, but it's a nightmare because Donald's trapped emotionally in being a 13-year-old boy. Just listen to how he talks about women, and you can see how immature he is in this regard. And Musk, who grew up a prince who could do no wrong, effectively a South African prince, he has this same narcissism that Donald does. And so once this came apart and they began attacking each other, it's going to expose the paved over or painted over fissures in the Republican Party, particularly the U.S. Senate.
And you that the bit that I find very interesting is that normally at the first, and you said it earlier on, Trump has a great instinct for knowing when he's being attacked, and he sort of comes out swinging. And yet, with Musk, since he started attacking the big beautiful bill, and he said things that are even more inflammatory in the last 48 hours, and yet the White House are incredibly conciliatory, which stands as an anomaly in terms of their normal tactics.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons I think that there's some financial relationship that we're not seeing with Musk or some other secret out there. The big bomb Musk dropped was to say that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. This is the American quote unquote financier. I think he was running basically an extortion racket where he got wealthy men sexual favors that would be illegal, juveniles, and then
He's well known on this side of the Atlantic too. There's been some pretty high profile names associated with him here.
yes, there certainly have. And Trump had promised during the campaign to release all the Epstein files, and he hasn't done so. And I think it's reasonable to speculate as to why that hasn't happened and is not going to happen under this administration. It'd be interesting to see if those files even survive this administration. But that bomb was a real signal, and you would think Donald would cut all ties at that point. No, Donald keeps trying somehow to figure out, is there a way to reconnect with Elon Musk, because he recognizes Musk is a real serious threat to him. And this is going to not go away in the short run. It may get papered over. And by the way, Musk is not wrong about this. This big, beautiful bill is one of the ugliest pieces of legislation in American history. I mean, literally, it takes healthcare away from 16 million poor people. It reduces the child tax, expanding the child tax credit, but not for the working poor or the poor, only for middle class, upper middle class people like me and wealthy people. It does a whole bunch of things that basically take from the poor and give to the rich. It's reverse Robin Hood. And Musk is not interested in that. He doesn't care about that. We know that from all of the lawsuits against him and other actions about mistreating his workers, unsafe working conditions, ignoring pay requirements and whatnot with people. But that, even with that said, he's quite right. This bill is very problematic, and it's got problems in the U.S. Senate. And by the way, think of the insanity of, oh, this debt is going to ruin the country, Donald says. It's too much debt. We have to get rid of the debt. By the way, please borrow another $2.5 trillion so that the wealthiest people in America can pay less in taxes. It is, well, I'm laughing, but it's really sad and tragic.
Yes, I mean, look, it's a cautionary tale that the populists all over the liberal democratic West are doing very well in opinion polls, but the reality is that that sort of populism is very hard to deliver when you actually have the finances of a nation in your hands. David,
Just one point on that. I wrote a best-selling trilogy in America early in this decade, perfectly legal, about the tax system, Free Lunch, about all these hidden subsidies where big corporations don't get their capital, in many cases, from the market. They get it from taxpayers by starving the schools and the police, and then the fine print about thwarting competition. The reason we're seeing this rejection of democracy, not just in the U.S., but in other countries, some of which have brief histories of democracy, some long, is this creation of economic systems that ensure the very wealthy will get richer and richer and richer, and do it by taking from children, the disabled, the elderly, the sick, from people who can't fight back. And so naturally, people are going to say, this isn't working. That's how Hitler rose to power. When people realized, I have no control over my economic life anymore, you need someone. And Donald comes along and says, I alone can save you. And America's internet is filled with images of him as God or godlike on this claim that he alone can save people. And the real problem is the system, the campaign finance system, which makes, as I've interviewed more than 100 members of Congress and the Senate about this, Your real constituency are your donors. That's a very narrow class of very wealthy people. It's not the people you were elected by. And until we get a handle on this, we recognize that the purpose of government is not to take from those with less to give to those who already have more than enough. We're going to continue to see a weakening of support for democratic values.
David, it's a cautionary note on which to part, but thank you so much for sharing so many really interesting insights into Donald Trump and thoughts on the way the world's going. I've really enjoyed talking to you. David K. Johnson. Well, thank you. David K. Johnson, Pulitzer Award-winning author on Trump and on the failures of liberal Western democratic economies. I will be on my way to buy his books immediately after we have finished recording. You've been watching Superpowers, the future of global security, here on Times Radio. For more of Times Radio's brilliant geopolitical content, make sure you subscribe to the Times Radio YouTube channel. But for now, goodbye.